The bruise blooming across Rebecca Harper's cheekbone was darker than the thunderclouds gathering over Salida, Colorado, and twice as ominous in the summer heat of 1877. She pressed her trembling fingers to the swollen flesh, wincing as pain radiated through her jaw where her father's fist had connected not an hour before. The mirror in her small bedroom reflected back a woman who looked both defiant and defeated, her dark hair disheveled, her green eyes still blazing with the fury that had gotten her struck in the first place. She had spoken her mind at the town meeting about the water rights, about how the ranchers were strangling the smaller homesteads, and her father had dragged her home by her arm, his face purple with rage that his daughter had dared to contradict Mayor Whitfield in front of the entire town. "A woman's place is silence," he had snarled before his knuckles met her face. "You will learn that, Rebecca, even if I have to beat it into you." She was 22 years old enough to know her own mind, but in this rough mountain town where men made all the rules and women were expected to nod and smile, her voice was considered nothing more than unwanted noise. She dabbed at the cut on her lip with a damp cloth, tasting copper and resentment in equal measure. The late afternoon sun streamed through her window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits, oblivious to human suffering. Rebecca could not stay in this house tonight. She knew her father's temper, knew that he would drink himself into another rage by sundown and come looking for her again. She stuffed a few belongings into a worn canvas bag, her hands still shaking, and climbed out her window with the practiced ease of someone who had escaped this way before. The streets of Salida were busy with the usual evening commerce as she made her way toward the mercantile, keeping her head down and her bruised face turned away from passers-by. The town sat nestled in the Arkansas River Valley, surrounded by mountains that turned purple and gold in the fading light. It was a place of miners and ranchers, of fortune seekers and drifters, where violence was as common as the dust that coated everything. "Miss Harper." The voice made her freeze. She had not been watching where she was going and had nearly collided with someone outside the general store. She looked up, ready to apologize and hurry on, but found herself staring into a pair of concerned brown eyes that belonged to a tall man in weathered boots and a dusty black hat. "I apologize, sir," she mumbled, trying to turn away. "Wait." His hand caught her arm gently, nothing like her father's brutal grip. "What happened to your face? Nothing that concerns you." She tried to pull free, but he had already seen, and the expression that crossed his features was one of barely controlled anger. "Did someone hurt you?" Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, hating herself for the weakness. "Please, just let me go." The man released her immediately but did not step back. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, someone who spent his days in the saddle rather than behind a desk. There was something in his face that made her want to trust him, though she had learned the hard way that trusting men was a dangerous game. "My name is Tucker Davis," he said quietly. "I work at the Double R Ranch south of town. If someone hurt you, you should not have to face them alone. You do not understand how things work here, Mr. Davis. Then explain it to me." His voice was steady, patient, and entirely unlike the impatient barking she was accustomed to from the men in her life. Rebecca glanced around, noting the curious stares they were attracting. "Not here, please." Tucker nodded once decisively. "There's a boarding house on 3rd Street run by Mrs. Chen. She is a good woman. Let me take you there, make sure you have a safe place for the night at least." She should have said no. She should have walked away and handled this herself as she always had. But the genuine concern in his eyes, The careful way he kept his distance while still offering help made something in her chest crack open just slightly. "All right," she whispered. They walked through town together, Tucker maintaining a respectful distance while staying close enough to make it clear he was accompanying her intentionally. Rebecca could feel people watching, could imagine the gossip that would spread through Salida like wildfire. Rebecca Harper, walking with a strange cowboy, her face bruised like a common brawler. Let them talk. She was tired of living her life according to their narrow expectations. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a tidy two-story building with whitewashed walls and flower boxes in the windows. The proprietor herself answered Tucker's knock, a small Chinese woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that took in Rebecca's condition immediately. "Come in, child," she said, her accent thick but her English clear. "Mr. Davis, you did right bringing her here." "Can you give her a room for tonight?" Tucker asked. "I will cover the cost." "You do not need to do that," Rebecca protested, but Mrs. Chen was already ushering her inside. "We discuss payment later. First, we tend to that face." She looked at Tucker. "You are good man. Come back tomorrow. Check on her if you like." Tucker met Rebecca's eyes, and she saw a question there. She found herself nodding just slightly, giving him permission to return. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and left, his boots heavy on the wooden porch steps. Mrs. Chen led Rebecca to a small but clean room on the second floor, then brought up a basin of cool water and clean cloths. As she gently cleaned Rebecca's injuries, she clucked her tongue in sympathy. "This is not the first time," Mrs. Chen observed. It was not a question. "No," Rebecca admitted. "My father has a temper. Usually I know better than to provoke it, but today I spoke out at the town meeting about water rights. I could not stay silent while the big ranchers steal from the small farmers. And your mother, dead these past 5 years." Mrs. Chen nodded sadly. "You cannot go back to that house. I have nowhere else to go. I have no money of my own, no prospects. A woman alone in this town." She trailed off, the hopelessness of her situation settling over her like a shroud. "We find a way," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "First, you rest. Tomorrow, things look different in daylight. They always do." But sleep did not come easily that night. Rebecca lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the town beyond her window. Somewhere a piano played, tinny and out of tune. Men's voices rose and fell in drunken camaraderie. A dog barked, and she wondered what had possessed her to trust a stranger, a cowboy she had never met before, with even this small piece of her vulnerability. Tucker Davis returned the next morning as the sun was painting the mountains gold and pink. Rebecca had risen early, helping Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, because she could not bear to accept charity without offering something in return. When Tucker knocked at the door, Rebecca felt her heart inexplicably speed up. "How are you feeling?" he asked when she let him in. His hat was in his hands and he looked genuinely worried. "Better, thank you, and thank you for last night. I should not have burdened you with my troubles." "It was not a burden." He said it simply, as if it were obvious fact. "Have you eaten breakfast?" I helped Mrs. Chen prepare it. "But did you eat?" She had not, actually, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to consider food. Tucker seemed to read the answer in her silence. "Come with me," he said. "There is a place down by the river that serves the best flapjacks in the territory, my treat." Rebecca hesitated. "Mr. Davis, you have already done too much." "Tucker," he corrected. "And I have not done nearly enough, please." "I would like to hear what happened yesterday, if you are willing to talk about it." Something in his straightforward manner made it impossible to refuse. They walked together through the awakening town, past storefronts opening their shutters and street vendors setting up their wares. The morning air was cool and crisp. carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains and the mineral tang of the Arkansas River that ran through the valley. The restaurant Tucker led her to was little more than a shack with a few tables, but the food was indeed excellent. As they ate, Rebecca found herself telling him the whole story. How her father, Harrison Harper, had become increasingly controlling and violent since her mother's death. How she had watched the powerful ranchers in the area, including Mayor Whitfield, manipulate water rights to benefit themselves while smaller homesteaders struggled. How she had finally had enough and spoken up at the meeting, only to be shouted down and then brutally punished. Tucker listened without interrupting, his face growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he set down his fork carefully, as if afraid he might break something if he was not gentle. "Your voice deserves to be heard always," he said, his tone fierce. "What you said at that meeting about the water rights, you were right. I have seen what Whitfield and his cronies are doing. They are strangling the life out of honest people trying to make a living, and nobody will stand up to them because they own the law in this town." Rebecca felt something warm bloom in her chest at his words. "You believe me. Of course I believe you. Why would I not? Because I am just a woman, and women are not supposed to understand such things." The bitterness in her voice was impossible to hide. Tucker reached across the table and, very carefully, covered her hand with his. His palm was calloused and warm, his touch sending electricity up her arm. "You are not just anything, Rebecca Harper. You are intelligent and brave, and you see injustice when others turn their eyes away. That is rare, and it is valuable, and it should never be beaten out of anyone." She stared at him, this stranger who spoke to her as if she were a person rather than a piece of property. "Why do you care? You do not know me." "Maybe I would like to," he said softly, "if you would let me." They sat there in that little riverside shack, hands touching across a scarred wooden table while the world moved around them. Rebecca felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into empty air. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "I would like that too," she whispered. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt almost like happiness. Rebecca continued staying at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, taking work where she could find it to pay for her room. She cleaned houses, took in mending, helped at the mercantile during busy hours. It was hard work for little pay, but it was honest, and more importantly, it was hers. Nobody hit her for speaking her mind. Nobody told her she was worth less than nothing, and Tucker came to see her every day. He would arrive after his work at the Double R Ranch was finished, smelling of leather and horses and the open range. Sometimes they would walk along the river, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17, about drifting north and finding work where he could. She told him about her dreams of being a teacher, about the books she read in secret, about the vast world she longed to see beyond the mountains that hemmed Ensalada. "You could do it," Tucker said one evening as they sat on the riverbank watching the water rush past. "Be a teacher, I mean. You are smarter than half the men in this territory put together. Women are not allowed to be teachers here unless they are unmarried and completely above reproach, and She gestured to her face, where the bruises were fading to yellow and green. "I am damaged goods now. Everyone knows my father threw me out. They think I must have done something to deserve it. Then everyone is a fool." Tucker's voice was hard. "And for what it is worth, I do not think you are damaged at all. I think you are the strongest person I have ever met." She turned to look at him, this cowboy who had appeared in her life, like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak. The setting sun turned his features golden, highlighted the determined set of his jaw and the gentleness in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her fingertips brushing his cheek. "Tucker," she breathed, and then he was kissing her. It was nothing like she had imagined a kiss would be. It was soft and careful and full of question, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and hope that had been building inside her since the moment they met. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Rebecca Harper," he said. "I know it is too soon and too fast, but I cannot help it. You are everything I did not know I was looking for." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for once they were not tears of pain or fear. "I am falling in love with you too. I did not think I could feel this way about anyone." "Then stay," he urged. "Stay in Salida. Let me court you properly. Let me show you every day that you deserve to be cherished, not beaten down." She wanted to say yes. God, how she wanted to. But reality was a cold companion, and it whispered warnings in her ear. "My father will not allow it. He still considers me his property. And Mayor Whitfield." She shuddered. "He has been making comments lately about how I would make a good wife, how I need a strong man to control me." "Tucker, I am afraid." His arms came around her, solid and protective. "I will not let anyone hurt you again, I swear it. You cannot promise that. You are one man against the most powerful people in town." "Then I will find help. There are good people here, Rebecca. People who are tired of being pushed around by Whitfield and his ilk. We just need to organize, to stand together." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that speaking truth to power could make a difference, that justice could prevail. But she had seen too much cruelty, endured too many blows to easily embrace hope. Still, with Tucker's arms around her and his heart beating steadily against her ear, she allowed herself to imagine it. A future where she was free. A future where she could speak her mind without fear. A future with this man who looked at her as if she hung the moon and stars. "All right," she said finally. "I will stay, I will fight. We will fight," he corrected. "Together." But fighting was easier said than done. Rebecca's father began making trouble almost immediately, spreading rumors through town that she had run off with a drifter, that she was a woman of loose morals who had shamed the family name. He demanded that the sheriff force her to return home, claiming she had stolen money from him, though it was a lie. The sheriff, a man named Garrett who was firmly in Whitfield's pocket, came to Mrs. Chen's boarding house 3 days after that evening by the river. "Miss Harper," he said when Rebecca answered the door, "your father wants you home, says you took $50 from his strongbox." "That is a lie," Rebecca said evenly. "I took nothing but my own clothes and personal items. Your father says different. Now, I could arrest you for theft, or you could come along peacefully and we can sort this out." Tucker appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. "She is not going anywhere with you, Sheriff. If Harrison Harper wants to make accusations, he can do it in front of a judge with actual evidence." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" "Tucker Davis. I work at the Double R, and I am telling you that Miss Harper is under my protection." "Your protection does not mean much in this town, Cowboy. Then maybe it should." Tucker's voice was quiet but carried an edge of steel. "Because if you try to take her by force, you will have to go through me, and I suspect there are others who feel the same way." The sheriff looked between them, calculation evident on his face. Finally, he spat tobacco juice onto the porch and stepped back. "This is not over," he warned. "Whitfield is interested in this situation, and when the mayor takes an interest, things tend to go his way." After he left, Rebecca felt her knees go weak. Tucker caught her, holding her upright. "We need to be smart about this," he said. "I am going to talk to some people, see if we can build support. You were right about the water issue, Rebecca. If we can get enough of the small ranchers and homesteaders together, maybe we can stand up to Whitfield's corruption. And if we cannot, he cupped her face gently, careful of the fading bruises, then we will leave. We will go somewhere else, start over. But I would rather fight for what is right here first. Over the next week, Tucker worked tirelessly to organize a meeting of the smaller landowners. It turned out that many people were fed up with Whitfield's manipulation, but had been too afraid or too isolated to do anything about it. Tucker's quiet determination and Rebecca's articulate understanding of the water rights issue made them a formidable team. The meeting was held in the back room of a small church on the edge of town, away from prying eyes. Nearly 30 people showed up, farmers and ranchers whose faces were weathered by sun and hardship. Rebecca felt her heart hammering as she stood before them, Tucker at her side. "Thank you all for coming," Tucker began. "We all know why we are here. For too long, Mayor Whitfield and the big ranchers have controlled the water access in this valley. They have diverted streams, built dams on public land, and squeezed out anyone who cannot afford to fight them in their own courts." Miss Harper here had the courage to speak up about this at the town meeting last week, and she was punished for it. But she was right, and we all know it. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice stronger than she felt. "The water belongs to all of us, not just to the wealthy few. The law says that water rights must be shared fairly, but Whitfield ignores the law because he owns the sheriff and most of the town council. If we stand together, if we document what has been done and take our case to the territorial government, we can force change." An older farmer named Hutchins stood up. "That is all well and good, miss, but Whitfield has power. He can ruin any of us who go against him. I have a family to think about." "We all have families," a woman said sharply. "I am Martha Keene, and my husband and I have been farming in this valley for 12 years. Last spring, Whitfield's men dammed up the creek that feeds our land. Our crops died. We nearly starved. If we do not fight, what kind of future are we leaving for our children?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Rebecca felt a surge of hope. "We document everything," Tucker said. "Dates, locations, witnesses. We build a case that cannot be ignored, and we do it together so no one person can be singled out and destroyed." They talked for hours, planning and organizing. By the end of the meeting, they had formed a coalition, appointed leaders, and set dates for gathering evidence. Rebecca felt more alive than she had in years, her mind sharp and engaged, her voice valued and heard. As people filed out into the night, Tucker pulled her aside. "You were magnificent," he said, his eyes shining with pride and something deeper. "Did you see how they listened to you? You have a gift, Rebecca. You can make people understand, make them believe change is possible." "We did it together," she said, but warmth flooded through her at his praise. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and she melted into him. When they broke apart, she was breathless. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could think better of them. "I know it has only been a couple of weeks, but I love you, Tucker Davis." His smile was brighter than the sun. "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, making plans and dreaming of the future. But their happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, Mayor Whitfield himself came to call. Rebecca was working in Mrs. Chen's garden when a fancy carriage pulled up in front of the boarding house. Whitfield emerged, a large man in an expensive suit, his face florid and his eyes cold. 2 of his men flanked him, rough-looking characters with guns on their hips. "Miss Harper," Whitfield said, his voice oily with false concern, "I have been hearing troubling things about you." Rebecca stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. Her heart was racing, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mayor Whitfield, what brings you here?" I understand you have been organizing meetings, stirring up discontent among the honest working people of this valley. That is a dangerous path, young lady. I have been speaking the truth about illegal water diversions. If that is dangerous, perhaps you should examine why." His expression hardened. "You are just like your mother, too smart for your own good. She would have lived longer if she had learned to keep her mouth shut." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" Whitfield's smile was cruel. "Your mother came to me 5 years ago with accusations about water rights, had all sorts of evidence, she said, was going to go to the territorial capital, make a formal complaint. Such a shame about that riding accident. Horse spooked for no reason at all, threw her right into the rocks." Rebecca felt the world tilt. Her mother's death had been ruled accidental. But now, seeing the satisfaction on Whitfield's face, she knew the terrible truth. They had killed her mother to silence her. "You murdered her," she whispered. "I did not say that. I simply said it was a shame, as it would be a shame if something similar happened to you or to that cowboy you have been spending so much time with. Tucker Davis, is it? I understand he is very attached to his horse. Would be terrible if the animal broke a leg and he had an accident trying to save it." Rage and terror warred inside Rebecca. "You cannot threaten everyone who stands against you. Can I not? I have been doing it successfully for 15 years. He stepped closer, looming over her. "Here is what is going to happen, Miss Harper. You are going to disband your little coalition. You are going to tell everyone that you were mistaken about the water rights, that you spoke out of emotion rather than fact. And then you are going to marry me." "What? You heard me. I am a widower in need of a wife, and you are a woman in need of protection and respectability. It is a perfect arrangement. You will learn to be obedient, I assure you. And if you refuse, Tucker Davis will have a fatal accident, your father will drink himself into violence again, and anyone else who has supported you will find their lives becoming very difficult." Rebecca felt sick. This was power without conscience, cruelty without consequence. And she was trapped. "I need time to think," she managed to say. "You have until tomorrow evening. I will send a carriage for you at 6 o'clock. Be ready." He tipped his hat mockingly and returned to his carriage, leaving Rebecca standing in the garden, trembling with rage and fear. She had to find Tucker. She had to warn him. Mrs. Chen helped her saddle a horse from the small stable behind the boarding house, and Rebecca rode out to the Double R Ranch as if all the demons of hell were chasing her. She found Tucker mending fence in the south pasture, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back on his head. When he saw her riding toward him at a gallop, he dropped his tools and ran to meet her. "Rebecca, what is wrong?" She threw herself off the horse and into his arms, the words tumbling out. Whitfield's visit, his threats, his confession about her mother, his demand that she marry him. Tucker's face grew darker with each sentence until he looked like a thunderstorm about to break. "That son of a bitch," he growled. "He will not touch you. I will kill him first." "He will kill you, Tucker. He murdered my mother, and he will do the same to you if I do not do what he wants. I cannot lose you. I cannot." Tucker held her tight, his heart pounding against her cheek. "We are not giving up. We are not letting him win. What choice do we have? We run. Tonight, we take what we can carry and we ride out of this valley. We go to Denver or even further if we have to. We start over somewhere he cannot reach us." Rebecca pulled back to look at him. "What about the coalition? What about all those people who trusted us? They will understand. And maybe once we are safe we can get help from outside. Go to the territorial governor, the federal marshals. But first, we survive." He cupped her face in his hands. "I am not losing you, Rebecca. Not to Whitfield, not to your father, not to anyone. If we have to run to the ends of the earth, that is what we will do." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. They would be fugitives, running from the only home she had ever known. But she would be with Tucker and she would be free. That had to be enough. They made plans quickly. Tucker would collect his wages and whatever supplies they could carry. Rebecca would pack her few belongings and say goodbye to Mrs. Chen. They would meet at midnight on the road north of town and ride hard for the mountain passes. If they could make it to the next territory, they might be able to disappear. Rebecca rode back to town with her heart in her throat, hyper-aware of every person she passed. Did they know? Were they watching? Would someone run to Whitfield and tell him she had been at the ranch Mrs. Chen took one look at her face and pulled her inside. When Rebecca explained what had happened, the older woman's expression became grim. "That man is devil," she said flatly. "You are right to run, but you must be careful. Whitfield has eyes everywhere." They spent the afternoon preparing in secret. Mrs. Chen gave Rebecca food for the journey, warm clothes, and a small amount of money that Rebecca tried to refuse, but was forced to accept. "You saved my life once," Mrs. Chen said. "You do not remember. 5 years ago when drunken miners attacked my house. Your mother, she stood between them and me, shamed them into leaving. Then she helped me file complaint with territorial marshal. I never forgot. Now I help her daughter." Rebecca embraced the older woman, grateful beyond words. As evening fell, she stayed in her room watching the clock crawl toward midnight. Every sound made her jump. Every moment stretched like eternity. At 11:30, she crept down the stairs with her bag. Mrs. Chen was waiting by the door. "Be safe," the woman whispered. "Be happy." Rebecca slipped out into the night and made her way carefully through the dark streets toward the meeting point. The town was quiet, most people already asleep. A dog barked in the distance. The smell of wood smoke hung in the air. She reached the designated spot, a bend in the road where a stand of cottonwoods provided cover. Tucker was already there with 2 horses, his own bay gelding and a sturdy mare from the ranch that he had bought with his last wages. "Ready?" he asked softly. "Ready," she confirmed. They mounted up and began riding north, keeping to the shadows, their horses' hooves muffled on the dirt road. Rebecca kept looking back over her shoulder, expecting at any moment to hear shouts, gunfire, pursuit. But the night remained quiet. They had been riding for perhaps an hour, just beginning to relax when they heard it, the thunder of multiple horses behind them. "Ride!" Tucker shouted, and they kicked their horses into a gallop. The chase was terrifying. Rebecca clung to her horse's mane, branches whipping at her face as they plunged off the road and into rougher terrain. Behind them, men shouted. A gunshot cracked the night, but the bullet went wide. Tucker led them up into the foothills, following what looked like a game trail. The higher they climbed, the rockier the terrain became. Rebecca's horse stumbled, recovered, kept going. Her lungs burned. Her hands ached from gripping the reins. They came around a bend and found themselves facing a cliff edge, a sheer drop into darkness. The trail had ended. Behind them, their pursuers were getting closer. Tucker looked around desperately, then pointed to a narrow crevice in the rock face. "There, we can hide." They dismounted and led the horses into the crevice, which opened into a small cave hidden from the trail. They pressed back into the darkness, hands over their horses' muzzles to keep them quiet, and waited. The pursuers rode past, their voices angry and frustrated. Rebecca counted 5 men, all of them armed. They milled around near the cliff edge, arguing about where their quarry had gone. "Whitfield will have our hides if we do not find them," one man growled. They could not have gotten far. Spread out, search the area. Rebecca and Tucker stayed frozen in their hiding place, barely breathing. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the men moved off, their search taking them further up the trail. Tucker waited another hour before he risked moving. When he was sure the men were truly gone, he led Rebecca and the horses out of the cave. They were both shaking with exhaustion and fear. "We cannot stay on the roads," Tucker said quietly. "We will have to cut through the mountains, take the high trails. It will be harder, but they will not expect it." "How do you know the high trails? I used to hunt up here." "It is rough going, but there are passes that will take us east, around Whitfield's influence." They traveled through the night and into the next day, climbing higher into the mountains where the air grew thin and cold. Rebecca had never been so tired, so sore, so frightened. But Tucker was always there, helping her when she stumbled, sharing his warmth when she shivered, giving her courage when she wanted to give up. On the third day, they crested a high pass and looked down into a different valley, one that lay beyond Salada's reach. A small settlement nestled beside a creek, smoke rising from chimneys. "Granite," Tucker said, pointing. "Mining town. Not under Whitfield's control. We can rest there, figure out our next move." They descended into the valley as the sun was setting, two exhausted riders on worn-out horses. The town of Granite was smaller than Salada, rougher around the edges, but when they asked at the saloon for rooms, nobody questioned them or seemed to recognize them. They were just two more travelers passing through. Tucker got them separate rooms, proper and respectful even in their desperate circumstances. But after Rebecca had washed and changed, there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Tucker standing there, his face uncertain. "I could not sleep without knowing you were all right," he said. She pulled him inside and into her arms, holding him as if she would never let go. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing together, alive and safe for this one moment. "What do we do now?" she asked eventually. Tucker guided her to sit on the edge of the bed, his hands in hers. "I have been thinking. We could keep running, change our names, disappear, or we could fight." "Fight? Tucker, we barely escaped with our lives." "I know, but your mother tried to fight and they killed her." "If we run, Whitfield wins. He keeps hurting people and nobody stops him. But if we can get evidence to the territorial marshal, to the governor, we might be able to bring him down." Rebecca felt torn. Part of her wanted nothing more than to disappear, to build a quiet life somewhere far away. But the other part, the part that had spoken up at that town meeting despite knowing the cost, burned with the need for justice. "If we do this, we do it smart," she said slowly. "We gather allies first. We build an airtight case. We do not go back to Salada until we are sure we can win." Tucker's smile was fierce and proud. "That is my girl." They spent the next month in Granite and the surrounding towns, carefully building their case. Tucker reached out to homesteaders and small ranchers throughout the territory, documenting Whitfield's abuses. Rebecca wrote everything down in meticulous detail, creating a report that read like a legal indictment. They found others who had suffered under Whitfield's corruption, including a former deputy who had been run out of Salada for refusing to look the other way. The former deputy, a man named Coleman, proved invaluable. He knew where bodies were buried, both literally and figuratively. He helped them understand the full scope of Whitfield's criminal enterprise, which went far beyond water rights into fraud, extortion, and at least 3 suspicious deaths, including Rebecca's mother. "Whitfield has been untouchable because he covers his tracks and intimidates witnesses," Coleman explained. "But if you have enough people willing to testify, if you have documentation, the territorial government will have to act. They cannot ignore this level of corruption." It was Coleman who suggested they take their case directly to the territorial marshal, a man named Blackburn who had a reputation for honesty. Tucker and Rebecca traveled to Denver with their evidence, their hearts in their throats. Marshal Blackburn was a gray-haired man with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to their story, reviewed their documentation, and asked pointed questions for over 3 hours. At the end, he sat back in his chair and regarded them seriously. "This is explosive," he said finally. "If even half of what you are alleging is true, Whitfield has been running Salada like his personal kingdom for over a decade. But taking him down will not be easy. He has connections, money, and he is willing to kill to protect himself." "We know," Rebecca said. "He killed my mother. He threatened to kill Tucker and anyone else who stands against him. That is why we need your help." Blackburn nodded slowly. "I will need to verify your evidence, bring in federal marshals, coordinate with the territorial governor. This will take time, maybe months." "Can you stay out of sight until we are ready to move?" "Yes," Tucker said firmly. "Whatever it takes." They returned to Granite to wait, and the waiting was harder than the running had been. Days turned into weeks. Tucker found work at a nearby ranch, and Rebecca helped at the local school, assisting the overwhelmed teacher with the youngest children. They lived simply, saving every penny, and in the evenings they would walk by the creek and talk about the future. "When this is over," Tucker said one night, "I want to marry you, properly, with a church and a preacher and everyone we care about as witnesses." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder. "I want that too. I want a life where we do not have to hide, where we can build something real." "We will have it," he promised. "I swear we will." 2 months after their meeting with Marshal Blackburn, word came. Federal marshals were moving on Salada. Whitfield and his associates were being arrested on charges of fraud, extortion, corruption, and murder. Rebecca and Tucker were summoned to testify before a territorial judge. The journey back to Salada was surreal. They rode in under federal protection, surrounded by armed marshals, and the town was in an uproar. Whitfield had been dragged from his mansion in chains. The corrupt sheriff had fled. The big ranchers who had benefited from the water diversions were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. The trial lasted for 2 weeks and was the biggest news in the territory. Rebecca testified about her mother's death and Whitfield's threats. Tucker described the systematic abuse of small landowners. One by one, witnesses came forward, emboldened by the federal presence, telling stories of intimidation, theft, and violence. In the end, Whitfield was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The corrupt sheriff was caught trying to flee to Mexico and brought back in irons. The water rights were reviewed and redistributed fairly. It was not perfect justice, but it was justice nonetheless. After the trial, Rebecca stood on the steps of the courthouse, breathing in the mountain air. Tucker came up beside her and took her hand. "It is over," he said. "It is over," she agreed. "What now?" "Now we live. We build that future we talked about." Rebecca's father had left town during the trial, unable to face his own complicity in staying silent about Whitfield's crimes. The Harper house stood empty. Rebecca walked through it one last time, remembering both the happy years with her mother and the dark ones after. Then she locked the door and never looked back. She and Tucker married in the same church where they had held their first coalition meeting. Mrs. Chen was there, beaming with pride. Martha Keene and her husband attended, along with dozens of the small farmers and ranchers who had found their voices through Rebecca's courage. Even Coleman, the former deputy, came to wish them well. The ceremony was simple but joyful, and when Tucker kissed his bride, the whole congregation cheered. They bought a small homestead in the valley, with good water rights and fertile soil. Tucker worked the land and raised horses. Rebecca became a teacher, officially hired by the town board now that Whitfield's influence was gone. Their life was not easy, but it was good. They worked hard, laughed often, and built something lasting. A year after their wedding, Rebecca gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after Tucker's father. 2 years later, a daughter arrived whom they called Alina after Rebecca's mother. Rebecca never stopped speaking her mind, and Tucker never stopped encouraging her. She became involved in territorial politics, advocating for education reform and women's rights. Tucker supported her completely, proud to be married to a woman who refused to be silenced. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of their homestead, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Thomas was playing in the yard, and Alina was asleep in Rebecca's arms. "You ever regret it?" Tucker asked, speaking up that day, starting all this. Rebecca thought about everything they had endured, the violence, the fear, the desperate flight through the mountains. She thought about her mother, who had tried to do the same thing and paid with her life. And she thought about the changes they had brought to Salida, the people who were thriving now because corruption had been rooted out. "No," she said firmly, "I regret nothing. My voice deserved to be heard, and you helped me make sure it was. We changed things, Tucker. We made them better." He kissed her temple gently. "You changed things. I just made sure you were safe while you did it. We did it together," she corrected. "Everything we have, everything we have built, we did it together." "Together," he agreed, putting his arm around her and their sleeping daughter. "Always together." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been beaten for speaking her mind, had been told her voice did not matter. But she had found a man who believed in her, who fought beside her, who loved her not despite her strength but because of it. Together, they had faced down corruption and won. They had built a family, a home, a legacy. Years later, when their children asked about how their parents had met, Rebecca and Tucker would tell them the story. About injustice and courage, about running through the mountains and standing up to bullies, about fighting for what was right even when the cost was high. They told their children that voices deserved to be heard, that the truth was worth fighting for, and that love, real love, meant standing beside someone through everything. Thomas grew up to be a lawyer, fighting for justice in the courts. Alina became a doctor, one of the first women to practice medicine in Colorado. They both carried their parents' legacy of speaking truth and demanding better from the world. Rebecca and Tucker grew old together on their homestead, watching the valley change and grow. The water flowed freely now, shared fairly among all who needed it. The town of Salida prospered, no longer under the thumb of a single corrupt man. And every day, Tucker looked at his wife and thanked whatever force had brought them together that evening outside the general store so many years ago. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Tucker stood with difficulty, his joints aching with age, and raised a glass. "To Rebecca," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "The bravest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." She was told her voice did not matter, but she spoke anyway. She changed a town, raised a family, and taught everyone around her what real courage looks like. I am the luckiest man alive to have spent my life loving her. Rebecca, her hair silver now but her eyes still bright green and sharp, smiled at her husband with a love that had only deepened over 5 decades. "And to Tucker," she responded, rising to stand beside him, "who saw me when I was invisible, who heard me when I was silenced, and who has stood beside me through everything. You told me my voice deserved to be heard always, and you spent 50 years making sure it was. I love you more today than I did the day we married." They kissed while their family applauded, and Rebecca thought about that terrified young woman with bruises on her face, desperate and alone. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that speaking up was worth the cost, that love and justice were possible even in the hardest circumstances. But she could not go back, so instead she looked forward. Their grandchildren would grow up in a world that was better because Rebecca had refused to be silent. They would know that voices mattered, that courage made a difference, and that love, the kind of love that stood firm against injustice and protected the vulnerable, was the most powerful force in the world. Tucker squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. Two old fighters still standing, still together, still believing that the world could be better if only people had the courage to demand it. The party continued into the evening, filled with music and laughter and stories. Children chased each other through the yard where Thomas and Alina had once played. The mountains stood eternal in the background, unchanged by human drama, silent witnesses to all that had passed beneath them. As the moon rose, Rebecca and Tucker slipped away from the festivities to walk through their land one more time. Their steps were slower now, but their hands were still clasped together, fingers intertwined. "No regrets?" Tucker asked, echoing the question from so many years before. "Not a single one," Rebecca answered. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner," she laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was 22. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. Everything happened exactly as it should." They stood together in the moonlight, two souls who had fought for each other and for what was right, who had built a life of meaning and purpose from the ashes of injustice. They had loved deeply, fought bravely, and left the world better than they found it, and that, they both knew, was enough. More than enough. It was everything,